All right. Good morning, everyone. I am Hai Vong, and I work in DISA Emerging Technology Directorate, along with my team lead for the technical exchange meetings, Dr. Joe Kovacic. We would like to welcome you to today's technical exchange meeting. Device 42 will be presenting its IT infrastructure discovery platform in today's session. I need to go over some administrative items before we get started. First, please mute your DoD 365 team sessions. Second, this session being recorded to allow future groups to present their capability by members of DISA and DoD community. Third, this is a public forum. No proprietary sensitive information should be shared in this session. Fourth, we encourage questions during the session. Please use the raise hand function in the team menus to alert the presenters when you have a question. You can also enter your question into the chat area anytime during the presentation, and the question will be addressed in the order they are received. I must provide the following full disclosure. This technical exchange meeting does not infer any intention by DISA or DoD to enter into an acquisition, contract, purchase, or endorsement of the presented capability. This session is purely for informational purposes only. We do not control how session participants will proceed with the conveyed content. Access into the TAM video, slide deck, and other TAM artifacts will be made available through the National Security Innovation Network website, whose link is provided in the TAM session invitations. With all that said, let us commence with the presentation. So over to device 42 for presenting.
Thank you. So as far as Device 42 goes, I just want to say thank you for consideration and taking the time to discuss this solution. First, I'll introduce Angela Gibson. So Angela is part of Abrahams. Go ahead, Angela.
Yes, thank you for this opportunity to present. We partner with companies like Device 42 and other niche solutions. Abrahams Consulting has been in existence for about 16 years. We serve the federal, state, and local government. And one of our practice areas is to provide emerging technologies to the marketplace. And this is an example of one of those practice that we engage in. This is our capability statement here. And as you can see, we are women-owned small business, 8A certified. We focus around reselling of hardware and software, the niche solutions that focuses on security, storage, and networking, managed services, and technical staffing. We are very thankful for the opportunity to present today. Back to you, Adam. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Angela. So a little bit of background on Device 42 as a company. We are a company that's been around for about 10 years now. We are heavily deployed across the continental US as well as many other countries. We are heavily deployed within the US agencies. So for the 6 US Armed Forces agencies, DoD, various other agencies across the US are also leveraging Device 42. And a lot of that comes down to the problem that we solve, which is helping organizations understand what they have deployed within their IT environment. So Device 42 is an IT discovery product. And with that product and those capabilities comes the ability to discover all your different assets, software, services, custom applications, storage, and cloud resources that are running in your environment and in the cloud. And we take all that discovered data and we build a robust inventory of the environment based on that data. Then we take the dependencies that are calculated out from our algorithms after we understand that inventory and give you the ability to really understand how the different components from the hardware all the way up into the custom applications work together to operate and to work in your environment. Now, this yields quite a few different use cases, from the ability to modernize an environment, move out of a data center, to do a hardware or software refresh. So if you're refreshing all your storage arrays or moving out of a server platform, moving to software-defined networking, all those types of projects really need great information about what the current environment looks like and how it operates so that you can plan how you move to the next phase or next modernization. But we also help a lot of organizations with the day-to-day activities around operating that environment. So providing operations and security teams with the information they need to respond to incidents, respond to outages, respond to security alarms, vulnerabilities, as well as help plan for any compliance and audit requirements. So providing the inventory and the detailed requirements that a lot of US agencies are required to gather for things like various audits, like the ports, the services, the software that's installed on everything within an enclave is something that Device42 does for many agencies. As far as what are the types of things that we can discover, Device42 has an incredibly broad capability across the IT environment. So from every iteration of Windows for the past 20 or 30 years, so all your different compute platforms there from Windows 2000 up to 2019, all the different Linux flavors from Red Hat to Ubuntu to Debian, all the different Unix systems like Solaris and AIX and HPUX, as well as AS400s or mainframes. It really is designed to cover everything that is going to compute in your environment. Now on the network side, we're going to cover the switches, routers, load balancers, any of the software-defined fabrics, right into the hypervisor. So whether it's VMware, it's Hyper-V, it's KVM, or it's more modern platforms like Docker or Kubernetes, Device42 has the capabilities to discover these platforms. And then the last piece is around the cloud. So whether it's AWS GovCloud, it's Azure's hosted cloud, or it's GCP, Device42 understands the cloud services that the organizations and the agencies are using. And we do the same thing all the way down to the bare metal devices in a data center. So the ability to give you insights and an understanding of the PDUs, the UPSs, the crack units, the temperatures, the load on those systems. Device42 really covers all the way from the bare metal right up into the application layer. And the last piece, and probably the most challenging, honestly, for a lot of organizations to understand, is around storage. So the ability to understand all the different storage arrays that are deployed within an environment, understand how they work together with the servers. So which servers are consuming which storage, specifically whether it's a data store, a volume, a LUN, and then understand the capacity of those mount points, of those data stores, of those LUNs, and then the overall capacity of the array. So data store or storage arrays are typically a very closed platform, and it's something that isn't shared across an organization. And Device42 gives a great way to democratize that information to all the different engineers and operations folks and security folks working in an environment. Now, within Device42, we are not only going to go broad across an environment, we're also going to go deep. So we're going to give you the detailed understanding of all of those assets that we discover. So pulling in information like the operating systems, the software, the services, the network, and then understand the custom applications. How do they work in the environment? What are they made of? And include the resources. So how are they being consumed? How heavily used are these servers, from the CPU, the memory, the disk, the network statistics, including the storage. So like I just mentioned with storage arrays, usually a very difficult thing to understand in an environment, but we help really open that up, help you understand how that storage is being used, how it's mapped to the servers, and really share that information with the group. From an architecture perspective, this is probably the #1 reason why Device42 is so heavily deployed within the US government, is because of the way in which we operate. So the Device42 architecture is designed for a highly secured environment. It is designed to deploy on site, and it is designed to operate without any communication to the outside world. So there's no requirements for Device42 to communicate to the internet, no communications to any centralized system, to any cloud resources. Everything that Device42 does, we do internal to your data center or in your VCP and GovCloud. Now, Device42 operates as a virtualized appliance. So it is a hardened virtual appliance that's deployed on any hypervisor in that environment. And then we have scalability through our remote collectors. So the remote collectors are deployed typically throughout the environment, usually one per, say, data center, roughly. And what that'll do is allow us to horizontally scale discovery, pull in all the information you need to understand your environment, and then pull all that data back. Now, the other piece that's really important about Device42 is that it is agentless. So there's no requirements to deploy an agent. You don't have to manage software installed in every single server in the environment and then worry about trying to keep that up to date, trying to keep it patched, worrying about any vulnerabilities that happen with that agent. Instead, everything that Device42 does, we do agentlessly. So it is a more hardened model. It does use typical standard protocols and then operates, like I said, isolated, can be air gapped away from the outside world and works just fine. All right, so I do want to highlight just a couple key features before we jump into the demo of Device42. But effectively for Device42, really some of the important things to understand are around the challenging problems that a lot of organizations and agencies have typically come with the custom applications. Custom applications are becoming more and more complex, and they're harder to understand and they're harder to support. And so Device42 helps discover everything that happens with a custom application. We identify all the different components, the processes, the services, the network communications, the databases, and their associated dependencies, so that we can produce a topology and an architecture diagram of that application. And that really helps operations teams, security teams, disaster recovery planning teams better handle the application and make sure that we're taking the appropriate measures to recover from outages, to properly secure the application, to make sure we're in compliance with any audit or requirements around the ports that are in use or the communications, as well as making sure that we are properly backing up and designing a disaster recovery strategy around that application. Now, the next thing that's really important to call out is the storage discovery. So like I said, really helpful to providing that deep insight into the storage arrays and providing the visibility that organizations need to these usually closed systems, understanding the capacity of the arrays, understanding the performance, understanding how they break down to the servers. So who's consuming this storage? How is it being consumed? Is it consumed in ways that we expect? Or are there things that we need to identify and to troubleshoot or properly secure? And really provides that visibility that can be difficult to get to. And then the last piece is around resource utilization. So this is a really key feature for being able to understand exactly what's happening within a data center, understand how heavily utilized the environment is, and then do capacity planning. So this is a great way to understand the CPU, the memory, the disk, the network statistics that are used in an environment, and then use that data to properly right-size the servers. So make sure you're not wasting resources, using resources appropriately, and identify any servers that maybe have been forgotten about, that should probably be decommissioned, and work to recover those resources. So really to wrap up on the presentation here for Device42, we provide the ability to really understand an entire IT environment, agentlessly discover everything that happens in that environment, pull in data from various different tools and systems like hypervisors, any management agents, any custom data you want to push through the REST API. We're going to consume all that data, consolidate it, deduplicate it, and then help share it with your IT teams, your security teams, to improve their day-to-day activities, improve their ability to recover from outages, improve their ability to do root cause analysis, to properly secure an environment, to help produce artifacts that are needed for compliance for audit requirements, or just to help automate it, because Device42 comes with a really helpful API that has the complete knowledge about the environment and you can use in your various different workflows. I will highlight some key integrations that are very popular for Device42. And so these are all included as out-of-the-box integrations and help share more information that we discover about the environment with the tools and systems you use on a day-to-day basis. It's a really great way to help broaden the organization's awareness of what's going on in the environment and meet you with the tools that you're already using today. Okay. So with that said, I'll pause. Any questions before we jump into the Device42 demo? Okay. All right. So is Jesse, yep, perfect. All right, so I'm going to hand it over to Jesse. Jesse's going to take you through the Device42 tool, and then if there are any questions, feel free. I'll be watching the chat, and then we can help answer those there.
Perfect. Okay, so I'll just get started. So like Adam said, this is just a virtual appliance you deploy into the environment. You give it an IP address, you browse to that IP, you're kind of off and running here. So when you first log into Device42, you're going to get this dashboard screen. I'm logged in as me. You can log in using Active Directory, anything Okta, SAML 2.0. But again, logging in as that user, we can do role-based access, so who has access to see what within the software. But I'll kind of get off, or I'll kind of start here. So enter search term, anything in Device42, regardless of how it got there, we can start searching for here. So it can be something as simple as IP address, all the way down to looking at a physical component of a machine. But again, anything in Device42 through the software layer, operating system, we can see that here. How we get the data is how it starts. So discovery, so you can see up here the different types of discovery, whether it be certificate discovery, cloud discovery, looking at the OS layer. So hypervisor, Nix, Windows is probably our most popular job type, but SNMP, so more of that physical layer, storage arrays. All of these are going to have sub-platforms that we can discover. So first thing you're going to see is a dashboard of jobs that are going to run, whether they be running on a schedule or something that we just run manually. But to create a job, there's really 5 things that we need, and I'll go through this really quick. We need the job name, what we're discovering, so you can see platform is VMware, so it's leveraging an API, support 443. If we change this to like a Linux, you can see it's port 22. So we're using those common protocols, common ports that are open. Once we know what type of platform we want to discover, now we go through and say, okay, well, what do we want to, or what's the discovery target? So is it this /24, also this /20? You can put in a range of IP addresses, you can put in host names, really anything you put in this here, as long as the remote collector has access to the data, we'll be able to discover that workload there. The first thing we do is a port check. So we see is, okay, is port 22 open on that specific IP? The second thing we do is an auth check. So we have built in, we call it secrets, but it's basically a password vault to where you can store all of those things. You can store them with role-based access, who has access to see those passwords, or maybe a burnt password. So you can use it for job creation, but nobody, including the person who put it in, can see that password. But essentially we come through and say, okay, we want a read-only credential, so this service account has access to look at these things, or maybe it's more than one, and it'll just use those in that order. That's really it, outside of creating a schedule to say how often do you want to sample that to see changes that are happening. So once a day, once an hour, that type of thing, you can create that schedule there. So super easy, because we're agentless, we're able to kind of get at that. We can turn on resource utilization to look at CPU, memory, disk, those stats, which I can show you that. And then there are other things that you can do within a job. For instance, you can say everything in these subnets I'm looking at are production, so let's go ahead and mark those as so. Or maybe it's something that you're saying everything in this subnet we want to move to the cloud, so you can start tagging those things. Or maybe it's a silent IT team, you can say this belongs to red team, blue team. But that's really it, creating a job. Once we create those, we give you a discovery score to say, hey, this is what we looked for, this is what we found. And then it becomes a device in Device42. So if I go to resources, all devices, you can see I have about 4,700 devices in my environment. We can filter those out and say, show me everything that's virtual, that is maybe running a specific operating system. We can go through and filter those out quickly. Obviously, this is something that we can report against as well, but it's just, if you want to look for specific devices, or maybe there's a vulnerability with a specific operating system, you want to see, okay, well, how many of those do I have living in my environment? I'll open up a physical device first, just to show you what we're discovering with that device. So this is an ESXi host. You can see we're discovering the host name, what type of device it is. So it is a virtual host, it's in service, it's part of production. You can see it's a part of a VMware cluster, the hardware serial UUID. We can do things with this information, like push these out via an API and say, what type of support do they have? And the major vendors will come back and say, they have this type of support. This is, when it starts, and this is when it ends. So just an example of what we can do with the data once we've collected it. more of that categorizing information. Where it's physically located, I'll talk about here in a bit. The properties of a device, so you can see CPUs, cores per CPU, speed, memory, hard disk. This is a summary of information. We can go into parts and see what's physically at each socket, what's at each DIMM, power supplies, NICs, but this gives you a pretty good summary of that information here. Device operating system, so we can see the OS, the version, the build. Anywhere with a hyperlink here, you can see it's interactive, so we can say, oh, I didn't realize that was, ESXi. Let's see where else ESXi would be installed. Or is installed in my environment. So you can see those here. You can kind of see them at a glance. You can see you have something here that's 5.5. Maybe that's something we need to get updated. But also that gets into our software licensing discovery. So we discover, what's running here, but we're also discovering, how many CPUs and things like that. So we can create a model to say, well, how is that licensed? Is it licensed per core, per user? So based on that, we can give an accurate count of how much of that you've consumed. Coming back to this device, the operating system, again, where it's physically located, I'll talk about here in a bit, but you can see data center, room, this is the rack, and then we can see where it's actually sitting in that rack. And again, I'll show you that here in a bit. Connectivity, so we're looking at MAC, ARP, and IP tables, so we're able to say this MAC address is talking through this NIC, through this port, through this specific VLAN, on a port on this switch. We can also look at this via a chart as well. So if you're a visual person and you want to be able to see those connections, we can see those here. Being able to see different, where things are connecting out, whether it be, here's a Juniper switch. We can see that connection here. We can expand on that relationship. Everything is very interactive. So expand on Juniper and see what else Juniper may be connecting to as well. So just kind of one way of looking at this here. But again, you can look at it via text as well. So IP address information, Device42 has a built-in IPAM. So as we're discovering these IPs, we're auto-populating a subnet. So we can do things like give me my next available IP addresses or how much of that subnet have I consumed. I'll show you that here in a bit. Power consumption, so we're getting that directly from the PDU or other. So we can actually see how much of that, you're consuming. And then here's an example of ITSM. So just a kind of a two-way sync for that. Life cycle, so check in, check out. We talked about the purchase information and the warranty, but we also have QR barcoding. Other has device URL information, BIOS information. We talked about parts. We won't really have anything that's applications or services because this is just a host. We can see the physical mounts, the file system type, and the virtual machines that are running on this device because this is a VM. Because it's a host, sorry. To kind of go back and show more of the physical side so we can see this rack information, we can go, open up this rack and get kind of a view into the rack of what's installed into the rack at what location. We can give you a view of, a rack view layout here, which will show kind of front and back of this. We can also do a bird's eye view of that rack. So we can see kind of here's a room sorry. So we can see here's a room, we can hover over a rack, see what's sitting inside of it. And very easily, say, okay, here's a top of rack switch. Let me see an impact chart of that. Or here's a chassis. Let me see the blades living in the chassis. Going, into this, I won't go too deep into it, but, not only are we able to kind of show you what's happening here and interact with it, but we're also looking at physical connections here as well. So we're able to tell you, hey, this is talking to this. Maybe it's this port on this switch is going to the back and talking to a patch panel, or maybe it's something that is leaving the rack completely, and we can see that it's doing that and where it's going. We're able to do that automatically through looking at those tables that I mentioned before. Power is a little bit different to where you have to give it its first physical connection. So you have to come in and say, hey, this PDU is talking to this device. But once that's done, it's in here. There's just no smart component to a C13 cable or whatever that is. So I'll kind of come back into showing you, here's a front, that view here again. If we go into a specific host, we can go back into that device. So again, very interactive. From here, we can see the same data. This is that ESXi host. We can go into the virtual machines and say, hey, I want to look at a VM. So this gets more into the actual operating system and moving into that application type layer. So here's a virtual device. You can see it's a MySQL server. We can see the host name. It's sitting in VMware. We can see what host it's living on. We can see what's allocated to it, operating system information, connectivity, all of that's going to be the same. The biggest takeaways are now we can see applications, software, and services. So Applications, I'll kind of explain what these are here in a bit, but just kind of keep in mind if this server were to go down, here would be the applications that would be impacting. But again, I'll show you how that's calculated here in a bit. Software, so we can see what's installed locally on the machine. The version, again, we can go in and say, let's look at Chef. How much of those are where else is Chef installed? So it looks like in 25 different places. And here's the devices that's installed. So again, not just the operating system, but we can also see that with the software use. Services. So before I get into services, I do want to kind of touch on the trends of a device or the resource utilization. So I talked about being able to look at those CPU, memory, disk stats. So this is where, this isn't really doing anything in our environment, but you could, see how much of that's consuming. If it's spiking during a specific time, we can open up these stats and say, hey, I want to see it for a week. Whatever it may be. This is a lot of times we're not using this directly here. We're using this for reporting or for right sizing, whether it be to move, workloads into hyperconverged, move them into a cloud provider. You can see that information here, and this is where we're using that to do those recommendations. So back at this device, so this MySQL server, and talking about the service communication, if I open up the topology, this is where we're able to say kind of everything on the left-hand side is what's talking to that MySQL server. So you can see the connections, you can see the direction of the communication. On the right-hand side, it talks about how they're communicating. So the actual service communication that's happening. We can see Java's busy talking to a lot of devices. We can see the worker IPs, worker ports that Java's using. You can see here, there's things like, this MacBook Pro that you don't see over here. We're automatically hiding hidden services because we assume you don't care to see, something like this that may be hard to consume. We can filter out specific types of communication here as well. We can look at a service dependency report, which is basically saying, if this device is talking through this IP, through this service to this device, how often, even if it's something we're not discovering, we're still able to see that communication's happening through those specific ports. But that's kind of what's happening in the background here. But again, this could be very hard to consume, especially if you start talking about expanding out relationships and saying, okay, what else is Tomcat talking to? Oh, it's talking to this Apache server. What else is Apache talking to? This, again, gets harder to consume. So what Device42 did is created what we call affinity groups. So affinity groups basically says, if it's application relevant, show me that data. So ignore kind of the service communication that we don't care to see. And we do that a couple of different ways. One is Device42 has been doing this a long time. So we know what those relationships look like. So we can write, or we can tell you, what that affinity group looks like. But we also have to where you can hover over, maybe this D42 is a custom app that I created. We can hover over that and say, let's star that. And anytime we see that in the environment, that's application relevant. So include that in the affinity groups. The first question people ask is, do you have to have any kind of agents, or how do we see applications? And it's still done through the same type of discovery. We're able to look at those tables and running those commands and getting the information we need to create these. So all we're doing is enabling affinity groups. They automatically create these impact or dependency views. So I can open up the same MySQL server. And what you're going to see here is a very easily more consumable view of what that application looks like. So you can see that MySQL server, you can see it's talking to an Apache server. So it shows you that relationship as far out as the application data goes. So it's talking to this Apache server, Apache's sending information to Tomcat. We can see what type of communication it's sending, or what ports it's using, and then Tomcat sending it over to MySQL. We can also look at this in a point in time. So you can see up here is, what did this look like October 2019 when this application first started getting discovered? And then as it started getting built on, maybe they started sharing database information or whatever it may be, we can see all of those changes to get, again, to where we are today. But what this is kind of missing is, what is this application? So I can see that we can see all the communications, but what is this? I can see that we have 2 Apache servers. Maybe one's development and one's production. Maybe I only want to see production. So that's where we created business applications. So really what we're doing with the business application is we're importing in the data. Let me open up one here. We're importing in the data that we've discovered. And then you can start to say, okay, this is known as my application, or my Juniper application. Here's the technical owner, here's the business owner. Is it mission critical? Is it part of a migration wave? what devices make up that application, what application components, and really what you get is a more consumable view of, here's my database layer, my middleware, we have a client entry, and then a QA environment branched off of that. And again, how we get that is just importing in the affinity group or importing in these connections, and then you can, say kind of what is, and kind of put a name to this. So I'm going to pause for a second to see if there's any questions, but just kind of keep in mind, we discover a device, we show you all the service communication, we bring that into the application communication only, and then we import that into a business application. So I'll kind of show you what we can do next. I just wanted to see if there was any questions. If there are any, it doesn't look like.
I see one that says, Airfield. Okay. Who are your DoD customers working with?
Sorry, what was the question?
Yeah, I got that one, Jesse. So it's the U.S. Army EAD test. Okay, I threw that in the chat too. But we're also deployed at several other agencies. So it's also Army, Navy, Air Force. The Air Force is the biggest customer for Device 42 within the U.S. government. There's 5 deployments, and that also includes 2 at Space Force. But we also have DoD directly, a few 3-letter agencies, NIH, Homeland, HHS, State Department, and NASA too.
And to speak to the asked about end of life, end of service, or end of life, end of support. So that is, like you said, it's a very moving target, and you brought up Cisco because Cisco, it makes it the most complicated. So because it's such a moving part, we do have a catalog of information that's already stored within the software, but some of that, you do have to. We can go into a hardware model, for instance, or maybe it's I'll just open one up here real quick. So we can look at a specific host or a specific device, whether it be a switch or whatnot. You're going to see the hardware it's running here. When you go into that, everything will have a hardware model page here, so you can go in and see those things. If it's something that's not populated, then you have access to edit this and make changes to that. And then anytime that we see this PowerEdge R610, that's automatically going to be populated based on you inputting it in that one time. So we make that easy by showing you hardware models and things that don't have those, and you can populate those. But yeah, there is, because it's such a moving target, sometimes there is that need to manually put these things in. And then another question was, do we require a live connection or a live internet connection? So no, we can do a lot of these things are done through updating the software as updates become available, and then the internet connection is usually just for if you're using kind of third-party type things, if you're connecting up to an ITSM or other. So, so with that being said, I'm going to kind of transition into spend 5 minutes on just kind of, now that we have all this data, what can we do with it? So Device 42, I guess 2 things that to kind of call out about Device 42 is we can get at data very, very easily and very quickly without having to deploy agents everywhere, and the way that we do discovery using common protocols, the CISO conversations are very easy. So again, we get at the information very easily. The next thing that I think we do is we let you consume that data however you'd like. So, we have built-in reports. So if advanced reporting gets more into, data dictionaries and into where you can make these, grand reports, we have a lot of built-in reports already there. Classic reports is a very easy way of making a report. So if you say, hey, I want to see everything that I have with end of life as of this date that's sitting in this data center, show me that information in these columns and include serial tags. So really easy to create a report kind of ad hoc there. We do have a cloud recommendation engine. So if you're looking to kind of push a workload into a cloud provider, we can say, hey, what would that look like in each of those? What do you want to look at in the cloud? So this is another thing that you may need internet connection for, is to send this out via, an API. So port 443 would have to be opened out. If you didn't want to do that, you can also download that device inventory. We can do one for you offline and then give you that data. But that's just another example of doing, kind of cloud recommendation. We also have built-in integrations to, the AWS migration evaluators of the world, Azure Migrates, things like that as well. But this kind of just gives you that kind of 40,000 foot view into what your infrastructure would look like in that cloud provider. We also have an object query language. We call it DOCL for Device42 object query language. So you can query the data, get whatever you want kind of in and out there. All it's doing is running a query. And so via the API, so Device42 also has an API, and you can see that by going to api.device42.com, but you can view these queries and things like that from there as well. And then again, we have a ton of integrations. The last thing I kind of wanted to showcase, actually, before I do that, we mentioned storage. So storage is just another type of discovery. So sorry, I kind of skipped over that, but within resources, you can see networks. So we can look at subnets, see kind of what's been consumed, what hasn't been consumed as far as your subnets. So kind of more of the IPAM side. Storage arrays. So we can look directly into a storage array with a vendor agnostic view and being able to tell you kind of how things are performing, how much space you have available, things like that. Let me open this up real quick here. Should be quick. So you can see here is a list of all of our storage arrays that we have discovered. We can go into one and say, okay, well, kind of how is that made up? Model information, capacity information, exposed capacities, raw capacities, looking directly into the controllers, initiator groups, disks, aggregates. All of these things are things that we can look at. We can look directly into a LUN. Here's an ESXi LUN. We can say, okay, well, show me, is that degraded? Is it misaligned? Maybe you want to look at a resource map to see kind of how that is communicating. We can look at a fiber channel disk, open that up and see, okay, well, here's the data stores that are being presented to that ESXi host. So just different ways of looking at that. We can look at trends of a device as well. So this isn't really doing anything in our lab, but you would be able to see kind of that lots of different metrics. This is, again, just as kind of not doing a lot in our environment. But again, storage arrays taking a vendor agnostic view. So a lot of our customers can, put something on NetApp, see how it's performing, and then put it on Pure and see how it performs there. So just kind of different use cases there. Database information, containers, we're getting very deep into that. So with that being said, the last thing I kind of wanted to talk about was an integration to our Power BI. So, this is an ODBC connection, so it's a real-time, live data here. We can interact with it. So pushing data directly here, you can create these awesome dashboards. We already have a lot of these templates created, so if you wanted to utilize them, but being able to kind of get this type of information, commonly servers that have common exploited ports open, things like that, whenever Log4j came out, it's very easy for Device42 to say, okay, well, let me show you, give me 10 minutes, I'll show you the devices that are impacted based on that. So just kind of going through, I just want to touch on this because this is something that a lot of our customers are using Power BI, as things come. So with that being said, I don't know, Adam, is there anything else you wanted me to kind of showcase? Otherwise, I can turn it back over for questions.
No, I think that was a good summary there.
Great. Thank you. This is Hai Wong from DISA again. To the audience, if you have any question for the Device42, you can unmute and ask question verbally at this point. Over. Right, it doesn't appear there's any other question from the audience. Is there any final thought from the presenters?
I would just say that I really appreciate everyone's time today, and I hope that this was a helpful session. If there are any questions, looks like there was a couple questions just came in the chat. So method of authentication for accessing Device42 portal. So the portal is controlled by several different options for how you authenticate into Device42. It can be connected to Active Directory or another LDAP provider and integrated that way, or you can integrate it with any SAML 2.0 provider. So if you want to do a single sign-on authenticated solution like that, or something that uses multi-factor authentication or smart cards or anything that supports SAML 2.0, then that's also supported as well. And Mark, yes, happy to share the slides. I did send them over to Joseph, although I'm not sure, Joseph, if you got them the second time.
Negative.
Negative. Okay. I'll have to. I'm not sure why that. Is it maybe because they're PowerPoint format? Maybe if I send them as PDF, maybe that'll come across.
Yes, you could do that. I also provide you a alternative email address when we had the dry run session last week. If you could send it to that address, that would be great. Thank you.
Sure. Okay. So I'll try both of those. But otherwise, yeah, feel free to let me know any interest there. We don't necessarily have a home lab version, but I can set you up with a demo license that can help with that. Okay. Any other questions before we wrap up?
It says, who are your DoD customers working with whom in the Army? Or that?
Yep, I answered that question, Angel.
Okay.
So is it possible you can share the contact information to the screen, or you can put it in the chat area?
I have to look at it and see what our NDA is with the specific Army and the partner we're working with, and then I can get back to the group.
Okay, so I would like to conclude this TAM session. If you are interested in further pursuing this capability, we'll send the contact information maybe in the slide deck later when we got the slide deck from the company. Also, if you don't comfortable to contact the company directly, you can also contact my organization, DISA Emerging Technology Directorate, for further discussion. We can help to coordinate and facilitate a discussion with the company on your behalf. Again, thank you, Device42, for presenting their capability in today's session, and thank you everyone for taking your valuable time as well. And I wish you all a wonderful day. Thank you very much.